TradeStation, Optima, all you guys are setting the default at 3. George used 5, and I will give you the facts and the details on that. Here's a case where you need to understand that when a market is stalled into a cycle low and then takes off quite strong, that's a cycle low. So with experience, to begin to recognize, to read what's happening in the market in a more experienced manner than just looking for fixed cycles. And in this case, in Australia, I was able to use a market that actually has a low, but most often, if I used this low, you never would have found the cycle. All right. Here I've got the S&P 500, I believe. Yep, not 600, 500. And I've got the Toronto TSX. And it shows that here I've got a cycle that's set on a 2-week at 10, and here I've got 2 weeks at 7. Now, it doesn't mean that I can use 7 when I drop down to a 1 week. I have to have a different setup for that because I'm going to be working with a different cycle period. If I'm looking at a 3-day chart and want to suddenly drop down to a 1-day chart, you need to have a different chart set up because more than likely, if you use stochastics, you're going to have a different period. Here's the D-trend oscillator, and it's going to be in most of my charts, so I'll explain what that is as we work through it. But D-trend is simply the separation between two, or the spread between two moving averages. In this case, you always have a 1 period, which means I'm going to be connecting all the closing prices. And then this is a simple 7-period, simple moving average. And every single time D-trend crosses the 0 line, it simply means that the short period is crossed through the 7 period. So the one is now have a positive spread. And when it drops back down, it will have a negative spread. This is the tool I use in extremely fast markets when I know normalized oscillators are going to lock up. The difference between setting up your stochastics with a fixed period, please understand using in this display is the Indy Nifty 50. The India index has had a wonderful cycle, but this is Gann cycles. So if you want to know something about that type of timing, take a look at 30-second Joule, and here's the website. I'm going to be passing on a bunch of links for you, so you'll have that as a reference. But I don't use fixed cycles ever for timing a market. Now, how did we get it so wrong with regards to how to set up the periods, the wrong numbers with regards to the percentage K, 3 being 5, and more importantly, where the heck did this 2080 come from? Well, it turns out that CompuTrack stole it. In fact, they named the oscillator because they didn't have a name for it. And they're the ones that came up with stochastics. But it's the programmer, important, it's the programmer, not George, that wrote the instructions on how to use stochastics. And George was, when you really think about it, was put between a rock and a hard place. Here you've got the first software company who's starting to put together a global product that everyone that's charting by hand wants. And he's still working on the development of stochastics. George was a physician. So everything that he wrote, you'll find is in with great clarity and detail. And he liked to be very thorough. But CompuTrack was in a hurry. We got to get this out and we got to put something down. And every vendor since then has been repeating what CompuTrack wrote as instructions. In fact, it's so bad on one occasion, and I can tell this story now because it's many years ago. I was the editor of the CMT journal, and a paper was submitted by a professor at the university, at Peking University. And he put together a very elaborate statistical study on every time the oscillator crossed 80, you're supposed to sell. Every time it crosses 20, you're supposed to buy. And his final conclusion was, this is proof all of technical analysis is BS. He didn't use those words. He said it more in university jargon. But I'm looking at this paper and I'm saying, this is not how stochastics is used. Not only that, stochastics, George states, this is not for a black box, and you're going to understand why. Vendors, please, Bloomberg, Optima, TradeStation, those are the three that I'm the most familiar with. You got to get rid of this 80-20 off your screen. It's just messing people up. And the default should be your starting period in 5, not 3, and then 3. So let's take a look at that. This is 20 minutes from my home. And this is the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, and the mountains are blue. And I go here when I have to purge everything out of my head. Sometimes you just get too married to your own market opinion and you want to be able to clear out all the cobwebs and go back and take a fresh start. And this is how I do it. So this is how I'm asking you, is everything you've probably been taught, having read in some books, or more importantly from your vendor off their screen, you may need to erase that and start with a blank slate. I assume you guys can see these pictures, so I just need to make sure it's not covering information. Let's start with George Lane's decision tree. He would start off with trend, and what I've done is copy just little excerpts that were from some of his trading charts. He would use stochastics, and it was always fun being a presenter beside the room where George Lane was giving a presentation at the TAG conferences, because you could always hear when he was winding up and swinging his bat and saying 1 divergence, 2 divergence, 3 divergence, and everybody down the hall would just wait till that one section would pass. He was a wonderful speaker and a warm-hearted supporter of anyone that was trying to enter the markets or learn. Then he would confirm stochastic signals with volume. And volume, he taught me, is a relative comparison. It's very different than when we see charts and we see declining volume versus rising volume in a longer horizon portfolio. This is trading. And then he would have 10 CPRs. CPRs are closing price reversal signals. And here's how he taught the signals to us. You'll find in his book is he could grade what was difference. We call that a key reversal, not a double bottom. So this was strong, key reversal. And notice how he breaks up the open and the close, which is kind of like a Gann swing chart, showing you so you really learn the relationships of where that open is relative to the close of the prior bar. And here you're closing up over a trend line. Over here, we've got a double bottom. Over here, it's also a double bottom, but it's much stronger because you're seeing that the close of the previous bar, the open opens above it, and then you close above that. Now, how we had to learn this is that we had to draw them. And for someone that's just entering the market, I think that shows you, see, being responsible for color film, before I was given that responsibility, I was responsible for the technical support division. And then as the brand manager of color film, I had to hand select the emulsions that would be for each individual photographer in National Geographic, the Jet Propulsion Lab, proprietary scientific labs, and so forth. So my eye was trained to a 2-degree slope change. And how I got interested in this industry is I remember being able to see the discussions of how people were waiting for signals to cross lines, and I'm going, whoa, I'm in the wrong industry if they have to wait to see crosses. So this was how I drew George's overhead cells. And I had, unfortunately, great guilt and confession as I was going through. You have the full page as the overhead was given, because it turns out when I was going through the binder, I had his overhead. I probably borrowed it to draw this and then threw it in my file, not thinking, and so I stole his overhead. But these were the 10 triggers, and so you actually have all of them drawn exactly as they were shown on the overhead as well. Guilty. Here's the page you want to look for in the material you want to download. There will be one that precedes it that's just text that runs to the side. That is the only thing that's on the internet. And it doesn't have the content and the depth of information that you're going to obtain in this. What this is first steps to Easy Street. And when he only distributed that for about a year, and he stopped distributing it because here you see retrospect and revision. So after that, he only gave this information out in his particular courses. Now, I referenced he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Here is stochastics that's being included and growing in tremendous acceptance and use within CompuTrack software. But that's also bringing a lot of business to George. So he can't go after them with great aggression to be able to say, hey, all of your information's wrong. He's assuming people are going to come to him and be able to get his recommendation. In fact, he said, to heck with them. If you want to really know how to use it, you're going to come and ask me. Well, the problem is he never saw down the road that this document was lost. And I didn't know it until I started getting these emails that, hey, this doesn't exist. But I realized the binder that I had was still on my shelf.